Welcome to the Inquiry. I'm Gregory Harms. Trippy logo thing. We're back. Logan's back. My editor's back. We're back to putting stuff in the episodes. It's been a long time coming. And now I learned he's going to go back to Japan next summer. So we're going to have to do this again next summer. Unedited episodes. But we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. So instead of me talking about songs that have been stuck in my head, I wanted to share a song that I think you should listen to. It's called Winchester Cathedral.
Winchester Cathedral, you're bringing me down.
By the new vaudeville band. Check it out. Okay, so this is a very exciting episode. For one, my editor's back. Two, we're using new equipment. My Godox light panels are up and running. We're recording this on a Sony ZV-1F digital video camera, so we've taken things to the next level. So it's very exciting. New equipment, returned editor, and yeah, I think that was it. Have I been wearing black t-shirts too much? I feel like I've been wearing black t-shirts for a number of episodes now. My outfit of the day. It's springtime, so I don't know. I don't want to wear a white t-shirt with a sport coat because I look like Don Johnson. Nothing wrong with Don Johnson, mind you. Nothing wrong with Don Johnson at all. Or Miami Vice. Yeah, let's talk about Karl Marx. Let's talk about Karl Marx. Where to begin? Well, this is a big topic. He wrote a lot of stuff. He made an enormous impact. And there's a lot we can say about Karl Marx. We could do multiple episodes on Karl Marx. You could have your own Karl Marx podcast for that matter. We could really go deep on this one. This episode, I just want to cover some basics, okay? I just want to keep it light, cover some basics, and I think that will suffice. So, it's important to keep in mind that there are two Karl Marxes. There is the Karl Marx who wrote books and had a wife and children and so on and so on. The one who actually existed. And then there's the one that many people talk about. And that Karl Marx did not exist. Because a lot of Americans, many Americans, they hear the name Karl Marx and they think of communism and they think of, Soviet Russia and the Ruskies and all that nonsense. Because those two things have been conflated. There's been an association that's forced into place. I'll get to that in a minute. So it's important that we read Karl Marx. It's like there's two Friedrich Nietzsches, German philosopher. People talk about Nietzsche, and they got a lot of opinions about Nietzsche, but, if you read his books, then a different Nietzsche emerges, the one who actually existed. And then we can talk about, there are two Noam Chomskys, for that matter. There's Noam Chomsky, like, people who dismiss, like, oh, he's this leftist, radical, Marxist kook. And then you can read his books and be like, oh, wow, You know, and like a whole world opens up. There's two Noam Chomskys. There's two Adam Smiths. There's Adam Smith, like the one that's held in very high esteem and sort of borderline worship by business departments, universities, and he's he's viewed as the godfather of capitalism and rah rah rah. And then there's the Adam Smith who actually wrote books. And if you read Adam Smith's books, then you see like maybe he wasn't the godfather of capitalism, and things get a lot less rah rah. So we got to keep in mind that there are two of these people, two Marxes, and we need to attend to his writings so we understand what he actually said and get to know his thought and break that connection between him and the Soviet Union. So why is this? Why did this even happen? After the Cold War, that is after World War II, and like in about 1947, the Cold War is set in place. You've got this superpower contest between the United States and the Soviet Union. They were considered the two major superpowers in the world, and so they got the two most powerful countries in the world representing one. The Americans wore the white hat, if you ask the Americans, and the communists or the Soviets wore the black hat. This is like a white cowboy hat, black cowboy hat situation, but of course it depends on who you ask. And so there's this ideological contest and a literal contest. A lot of it was theater. I'm not even sure if I buy the superpower thing, because yes, the United States was no doubt by 1947 the richest, most powerful country in the world, without a doubt. But the Soviet Union, World War II, during World War II, the Soviet Union took a beating, and it was on a defensive footing after World War II. It was not looking to get into adventures. It was not looking to, extend its tentacles all over the world like the United States was trying to do. So there's a first place, second place, and the Soviet Union was in a distant second place when it comes to power and prestige on the international stage. Nevertheless, that's how it was packaged, and it became a justification. So the United States could do whatever it wanted all over the world, and it could just blame, the Soviet Union. They could chalk everything up as being in the interest of national security and so on and so forth. We could just do anything. And no matter what the CIA did, no matter what the executive branch did, it was always in the interest of national security. And yeah, we had a built-in boogeyman. We had a built-in bad guy. They wore the black hats. So as far as the ideological component of this story goes, the Soviet Union chose as their poster boy, if you will, Karl Marx. I'll come to that in a second. And then the United States chose as its poster boy Adam Smith, godfather of capitalism. So it was basically a contest between Karl Marx and Adam Smith. Now, both of these things are wrong. The Soviet Union had very little, if anything, to do with Karl Marx, and the Adam Smith that was packaged and promoted in the United States and in the West was not the Adam Smith that's in print. Nevertheless, I'm going to let Noam Chomsky speak to this point about the contest between these two ideological, what he calls agencies.
After that comes the view that all of this is socialism. And why should the communist parties take that view? I think the reason is because they wanted to sort of exploit the moral force of socialism, which was quite real. You know, it's kind of hard to remember that today, but at that time it was very real. This was regarded as a, you know, as a progressive moral force, and by associating their own destruction of socialism with the aura of socialism, they hoped to gain credit in the working classes and other progressive sectors. Now, the West also identified that with socialism, and they did it for the opposite reason. They wanted to associate socialism with the brutality of the Russian state that undermined socialism. So what you had is that the two major world propaganda agencies, for their own and quite different reasons, were claiming that this is socialism, that this destruction of socialism is socialism. And it's very hard to break out of the control of the world's two major propaganda agencies when they agree. They agreed for different reasons, but they basically agreed, and that then became doctrine and dogma. Well, I think people should ask whether that's true.
So, why did the Soviets choose Karl Marx? Because Vladimir Lenin, who was kind of, no, it's not a great comparison, but it's kind of like the Soviet George Washington, I guess. He was the leader of the what's called the October Revolution. He was in exile at the time that the revolution was heating up, and then the Germans thought, hey, we're gonna, you know, these guys want to pull Russia out of World War I, and they want to knock over the Tsar. Splendid. So the Germans helped Vladimir Lenin return to Russia. They put him in a sealed train, and off to Russia he goes, where he spearheaded led the revolution, which really wasn't a revolution. It was more of a coup. Revolutions take place from the ground up, and what Lenin and company did was top down. So Lenin goes back to Russia. We see the world witnesses the October Revolution, and they ram into place this communist system in Russia. They were building a workers' paradise. Except it wasn't a workers' paradise. It was a single-party tyranny. Lenin, you'll often hear Marxist-Leninism. You'll hear these. They'll couple these two names, Marx and Lenin. Okay, so Marxist-Leninism. So the question is, what was Lenin's contribution to Marxist-Leninism? Why the Leninism part? Marxist-Leninism, the Leninism part has to do with principally what's called vanguardism. So Karl Marx concluded that a revolution would take place. The capitalist system would collapse under the weight of its own contradictions, and there would be a revolution, bottom up. The workers would seize the control, seize the means of production, and they would take over the factories and so on and so forth. This would take place in the countries where capitalism was in its most advanced stages. So we think maybe England, or maybe Germany, something like this. But this is, Marx certainly did not have Russia in mind. Feudal, backward, largely agrarian peasant Russia, where capitalism was nowhere near its most advanced stages. But Lenin thought, okay, Lenin and a cadre of very power-hungry intellectuals, the vanguard, if you will, that's what Lenin called them, the vanguard. They rammed into place this communist system in Russia at the barrel of a gun. Anything that smelled like a labor organization was immediately crushed. Incidentally, the Nazis did the same thing. Power holds unions in contempt in any system. Communist, fascist, Jeffersonian Republic. It doesn't matter. They all hate unions because unions are democratic structures. Unions give workers a voice, and power does not want labor or workers to have a voice. So they all hold unions in contempt. And certainly Lenin and company were no different. So they, at the barrel of a gun, seized control. This was all top down. This was all single party. They consolidated power in the Communist Party, and more specifically the Central Committee. And that there's your Leninism. There's your Marxist Leninism. Now Lenin was an intellectual, and Lenin did know his Marx. And if you read the writings of Lenin, specifically, I would say his book State and Revolution. Lenin was no dummy, and Lenin did know his Marx. But there's the Lenin on paper, there's the Lenin analyzing Marxist thought, and then there's Lenin, the power-hungry ideologue who took over Russia, and is responsible for a pretty serious body count. So there are legitimately two Lenins, the one on paper and then the actual Vladimir Lenin, basically a despot. So that's a little bit about Leninism and what that means and why there are two Marxes and why we associate Marx with Soviet Union and why we have divided the world into white cowboy hats and black cowboy hats. We were the white cowboy hats, of course. That's obvious. And then the Kremlin, Moscow became this sort of evil empire. And that's how we look at the world. And this really had a profound effect on a couple generations of Americans, and they gobbled this up. Americans, typically men, let's be honest, typically American men, they love to vent that politicians are liars and crooks, except those men will turn around and believe everything they're told. And they gobbled up this Cold War ideology. They internalized it, and I hear it to this day. It's like it's in their bones. This is how they look at the world. That's how they view the United States versus Moscow. And it's sort of changing now, but this was pretty hot into the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. That was just the sky's blue. That was the view of this power dynamic between Moscow and Washington D.C. So if you learn anything, if you take away anything from this episode, I would like you to take away this fact, that this association of Karl Marx with the Soviet Union is unmitigated, unalloyed, unadulterated, categorical bullshit. Now, if you can remember that, if you can take that away from this episode, then I've done God's work. I've done God's work. Yeah. That's what I want you to take away from this. Okay. Now, let's get into Marx specific. Let's get into Marx's thought. Now, I'm going to pull 4 chief concepts. Not chief, is that the right word? I'm just saying, maybe just important. I don't know, chief. Important. I'll say important concepts. 4 important concepts that I think are essential to understanding Marx. Now, you could do an entire podcast just on these 4 concepts. You could and you could triple it a few times. I mean, you could this list could be very long. I mean, Marxist thought is he wrote a lot. I'll talk about his works in a minute. And it goes deep, and there's a breathtaking amount of literature on the subject, both by Marx and about Marx, and there's a lot to cover there. So I just want to stick to these four. I just want to pull four concepts that I think are important and essential to understanding Marx, and I'm going to explain them quickly, and I'm going to try to make them as easy as I can. Some of them sound scary, but we'll just go slow. And did I just say quickly and then slow? Yeah, I think I just did. I'm going to go at a reasonable. I'm going to go at a reasonable pace. Did I just do that? Did I just say that? I'm going to do this quickly. I'm going to go slow. It'll go at a slow pace. I think I just did that. Okay. Number 1, historical materialism. Okay, this sounds a little scary. Not scary, but, we're getting into some deep intellectual waters here or something. These concepts sometimes can sound a little intimidating. I'll give you that. But I'm going to explain them as simply as I can, and at a reasonable pace. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. So I'm gonna borrow from a concept from a comment that Noam Chomsky made years ago. He said, anyone can explain anything to anyone. And I think that's correct. I think that's correct. We're going to go with that. So, historical materialism. What the hell does that mean? It means simply Marx borrowed from two historical traditions. Okay? Just stick with me. On the one hand, you got historical idealism, specifically German idealism, and the historicity therein. By German, we mean specifically Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, GWF Hegel. Okay, Marx read a lot of Hegel, wrote a lot about Hegel, was influenced by Hegel, and so Hegel argued that history is unfolding according to a process. Okay, and Marx was very taken with that idea that history is unfolding according to a process. But where Marx does not agree is that Hegel emphasizes consciousness. Hegel emphasizes Geist, which is German for spirit. And that's where Marx parts company with Hegel. He likes the historical process part. He doesn't really like the idealism part. And then there's the other part of it, materialism. So we're going to put Hegel over here. Okay, materialism, we think of Thomas Hobbes, 17th century thinker, and wrote Leviathan, that's his masterwork. And then Feuerbach. Feuerbach was a thinker. Marx knew Feuerbach. So Hobbes and Feuerbach and others put forth a materialist philosophy. That is, they emphasized the physical, mechanical aspects of reality. So Marx was kind of taken with that too. But he doesn't see a historicity in that philosophy. So on the one hand, you've got ahistoric materialism, And then you've got historical idealism. So Marx borrows one concept from each tradition, and you get, bang, you get historical materialism. You get a historicity. You get a historical process. History's unfolding according to a process. But yet it's grounded in the day-to-day. It's grounded in humanity's material needs. It's grounded in class conflict, the class conflict that drives history. History is unfolding according to what humans need, and then the conflict between the two dominant classes for Marx, which are the proletariat, that's the working class, and the bourgeoisie, which is the capitalist class. And there's an inherent adversarial relationship between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. So history is driven not by great ideas and great men, but by humanity's material needs and the class conflict that exists between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. That is historical materialism. Next on our hit list, we've got the labor theory of value. The labor theory of value. Now, there's another one that sounds like, oh God, that might be a little intimidating. It's not that complicated. We're gonna break it down. So the labor theory of value. Marx did not come up with a labor theory of value. We can find the labor theory of value in the writings of the classical economists like Adam Smith and David Ricardo. And Karl Marx was big time influenced by David Ricardo. So the labor, but Marx takes the labor theory of value and he deepens it. He puts a little twist on it, and so let's break that down. Okay, Marx distinguishes between two types of. We got concrete labor and we've got abstract labor. Okay, he differentiates between two types of labor: concrete labor and abstract labor. Now, concrete labor produces use value. Abstract labor produces an exchange value. So what's the difference between what's the difference between use value and exchange value? Well, the use value is what you're going to do with the commodity you just purchased. So say you go to Home Depot and you buy a garden hose. Okay. That's got a use value. You're going to buy the hose, you're going to take it home, and then you're going to water the flowers or something like that. Okay, so it's got a practical use value, the things you do with a garden hose. Okay, and then you got an exchange value. That is, how much money can Home Depot get for a garden hose? And then how much money do you have to pay? How much money do you have to give Home Depot for your garden hose? Okay, so go to Home Depot. I'm going to buy a garden hose for, I don't know what the hell a garden hose costs, like, $20 or $30 or whatever. Am I close? I don't even know what a garden hose costs. That's terrible. I bet $20, $30. Would that get your garden hose? Oh my God, I'm really self-conscious about that. That suggests I'm like totally divorced from reality. I bet I'm close. I'm just going to rest in the assumption that I'm close. So that's the exchange value. The profit that the company, so some company made the garden hose, and then they presumably sold it to Home Depot, and then Home Depot is going to sell it to you. So the company made the garden hose, they make a profit, and then Home Depot makes a profit, because Home Depot, I really highly doubt makes garden hoses. Some separate company made the garden hose. So profit gets made from the manufacturer to Home Depot, and then from the Home Depot to you. Okay, so then you go buy your garden hose. Okay, so that's abstract. That's concrete and abstract labor. Concrete labor and abstract labor producing use value and exchange value. Okay, now if we consider an undeveloped economy, like we saw in like the feudalist period, feudalist times, then Marx summarizes that as CMC. Okay, I'll put that on the screen. CMC, what Marx calls the circuit of commodities. So, say a blacksmith or a cobbler or something. Okay. The blacksmith is going to acquire commodities, that is raw materials, so he can produce his wares. Okay? So, going to acquire commodities, going to acquire raw materials, and then the blacksmith's going to make whatever he's making, and he's going to sell it. He's going to produce it, he's going to make a profit. And then he's going to take that profit and he's going to go buy other commodities that he needs, like to live, like food and clothes and stuff like that. So CMC, that's the circuit of commodities. And I just as a side note, I'd like to point out that making a thing and producing a profit by making that thing has nothing to do with capitalism, because they were doing that in the feudal system. During feudalism, you make a thing, you sell it for a profit, and that's how that works. And it's got nothing to do with capitalism. Capitalism's about, read the writings of Karl Marx. That'll tell you. It's about reinvesting. It's about controlling the means of production. It's about reinvestment. It's about this kind of stuff. It's not about making a profit. People have been making a profit for forever, making stuff and selling stuff. Or you could have a very simple formalization. You could have M primed. That is like banking. That's about the simplest system you could have, where you start with money and then you produce profit. So you produce this M prime. M prime means profit. So you have M, you start with the money, and then you invest the money, and then you produce a profit based on however you invested your money, and then you get M prime. So the current, in many cases it is current. But Marx is talking about factory capitalism in the 19th century. So he summarizes this or formalizes it as MCM prime. So what does that mean? What he calls the circuit of capital. The capitalist who owns the factory starts with money, right? And then the capitalist then produces the factory produces commodities. You start with the capital, start with money, you produce commodities, the factory makes whatever, and then the factory sells the commodities for a profit, M prime. So MCM prime. So that's how Marx summarizes or formalizes these economic models. CMC, MM prime, and MCM prime. Okay, so where does that take us? So we're going to focus on the MCM prime because that's the economic model that Marx is talking about, right? So we start with, again, Marx differentiates two types of labor here, between necessary labor and surplus labor. Now, necessary labor is the cost of employing the worker. The worker needs food, the worker needs clothes, so the worker's going to need the sort of a baseline set of needs that the worker needs to acquire to basically stay alive. So the capitalist has to clear that necessary labor. He has to clear that before he can make a profit. Okay, so they got necessary labor. So let's say it costs I don't know, I'm just picking a round number, $10 a day. Okay, $10 a day will keep the laborer fed and clothed and whatever else. Okay, so after that $10, we got to clear that cost. Everything else beyond necessary labor is surplus labor. And this is the ticket, okay? So we got surplus labor. We've cleared the costs. We've cleared the costs of necessary labor, and we've entered into surplus labor, because obviously the worker's not going to work for one day. Well, the worker's going to keep coming back to work. And the capitalist will keep paying the worker a certain wage, but all the while, the capitalist is making a profit because of this surplus labor, because surplus labor leads to surplus value. And that's it. That's the thing. Surplus value. So the more the laborer works, the more hours the laborer puts in, the more surplus value the laborer produces for the capitalist. And this is achieved through exploitation. This is an exploitative system, Marx concludes, that once I clear the cost of necessary labor, I enter into surplus value, and I extract surplus value from the laborer once I've cleared the cost of necessary labor through exploitation, and that is the labor theory of value. Okay. Third, alienation. There are 4 ways that the worker in a capitalist system, in a capitalist economy, is alienated. And Marx enumerates the 4 as follows. The worker is alienated from the products he or she makes. The laborer is alienated from the process, from the very labor he or she is put into making those products. Third, the laborer is alienated from his or her species being. I'll explain that in a minute. And fourth, the laborer is alienated from other human beings, from the individual. So that's our 4: products, process, species being, and individual. So I'll explain those 4 in turn. What does that mean? The laborer is alienated from the products. The laborer is not choosing to work. The laborer has to work. The laborer is basically forced into labor. It's the only thing the laborer has to sell is his or her labor power. So by virtue of producing things because he or she has to, not because he or she chooses to, we are alienated from the products that we make. The laborer is alienated or detached or estranged from the very products that they make. Oftentimes, laborers can't even afford the things they're making. You know, the people who make Louis Vuitton purses probably don't buy Louis Vuitton purses. So the person buying the Louis Vuitton purse has no idea who made that purse or under what circumstances that purse was produced. They just plunk down their $800 or $900 and there's your purse. And the person who produced that purse is probably working in misery, and but someone who's buying luxury goods probably doesn't care. So there's an alienation from the products themselves. There's a relationship, and it's detached between the laborer and the products. The laborer is not enjoying this labor. The laborer is not engaging in this labor freely. The laborer is not creatively, it's not an expression of who the laborer is or what the laborer is. It's just a forced, coerced situation that the laborer is in, and therefore there's a disconnect between the laborer and the products that he or she is making. When it comes to process, the laborer is alienated from the very process of producing those products. The laborer is forced into this situation. The laborer is not acting in accordance with what he or she is. The laborer is not acting in accordance with an impulse to create and engage in meaningful work. The worker does not own the means of production. If anything, the means of production own the worker. And so the relationship to the labor itself is one of alienation or estrangement or disconnection or detachment. They all amount to about the same thing. There's a detachment between the worker and the labor that is basically, it's just sold. The worker is just selling his or her labor power because it's the only thing the laborer has to really sell, and then he or she is entering into, as we just discussed, an exploitative arrangement whereby the capitalist is extracting surplus value. So the relationship between the worker and his or her work is estranged. Species being. This will come up a little in a couple of minutes. For Marx, human beings are their labor. We are creative, engaged, social beings. We're a cooperative species. We naturally create things. Yes, some animals create things, like ants create things, and bees create things, and beavers create things. And so it's not unknown, it's not unheard of in the animal kingdom. But animals that make stuff, like beehives and dams, they just make that stuff, they just make what they need, and then they're done. But humans make stuff, and make more stuff, and make art, and make more stuff, and it never stops. Because for Marx, humans are our labor power. We engage the world in a creative kind of way. We engage the world in the mode of production, in the mode of creativity. We pour our heart and soul into the things we do and the things we make and the things we love, and we make art, and no animal does this. Bees don't do that. Human beings do that. And so by virtue of entering into this estranged relationship, this exploitative relationship, the laborer is estranged or alienated from his or her species being. It alienates us from the very thing that we are. And fourth and finally, or last but not least, that kind of thing, we talk about we're alienated from the products, we're alienated from the process, we're alienated from our species being, so it follows that we would be alienated from the individual. We're alienated from one another. The individual, the other person is a potential competitor, is a threat. I need to be protected from this threat. We become alienated from one another. Workers become alienated from other workers. The whole thing is toxic through and through, and so there's an inherently adversarial relationship between the individual, or alienated relationship between the individual and the other, and we view the other as a potential competitor. We don't know who made the handbag. We don't know who made the garden hose. We don't care. When we buy an iPhone, we just it's shiny and it's new and yay, and oh, I got a text, and you don't care that it was made in basically a labor camp in China, and that there's netting around the building to keep people from throwing themselves off the building because there is absolute human misery built into your phone. But you don't care. You go to the Apple store, you buy your new iPhone, and you don't care about the life of who made it. You don't care that there's netting around the building to catch the bodies because the people that work there want to jump off the building. You just want your new phone. Brand new phone. I got a text. Oh, a nice iOS. Oh, there's an update. We don't care. We don't care about the people who make the phone. We don't care about people producing these phones on virtual labor camps. We just like the thing. So we're alienated from the people who make those things. We're alienated from them as individuals, as human beings, and that is alienation. I'd like to read 2 quotes that I pulled from the Estranged Labor chapter in the 1844 manuscripts, which I'll mention in a minute. The first is, the fact that labor is external to the worker, that is, namely, it does not belong to his intrinsic nature, that in his work, therefore, he does not affirm himself, but denies himself, does not feel content but unhappy, does not develop freely his physical and mental energy, but mortifies his body and ruins his mind. The worker, therefore, only feels himself outside his work, and in his work feels outside himself. He feels at home when he is not working, and when he is working, he does not feel at home. His labor is therefore not voluntary, but coerced. It is forced labor. Okay, and then the second one, this is good. Thought that was pretty good, but the second one, it is therefore not the satisfaction of a need. It is merely a means to satisfy needs external to it. Its alien character emerges clearly in the fact that as soon as no physical or other compulsion exists, labor is shunned like the plague. Well, that really says it in a nutshell. We don't work because we want to. We don't work because it's an expression of who we are. We avoid it like the plague. It's misery. It's the thing you have to do, Monday through Friday. I'm rather parched. I need to take a sip. So we'll break. I'll enjoy this soothing music. Okay, we're back. Yeah, I'm talking too much. I got thirsty. And I got a Yeti. See my Yeti? Pretty cool, huh? I don't know why I'm turning it. Oh yeah, Yeti. See? I was drinking out of this plastic, like, to-go cup, like this. Like, when I say to-go, I mean like from a Chinese restaurant. Like there was chop suey in it or something, and I was just using it as a cup, and then it became stained because I drink a lot of iced tea, and so this plastic tumbler, like for food, got all stained and nasty, and it became known as my hillbilly cup. And then I was like doing interviews, like talking about foreign policy in the Middle East, and then like this friend of mine, I believe we're calling her Kate. She noticed I took a swig. I drank some iced tea during an interview, and I drank it out of the hillbilly cup, and oh my God, I'm still hearing about that. I'm still hearing about that. So I got this. So this Yeti was purchased for me, and I was forced to get rid of my hillbilly cup. We're not supposed to use the word hillbilly. I apologize if I offended anyone with my use of the term hillbilly. I just wanted to talk. I just wanted to show my Yeti. Okay, and just like that, you're impressed. Like, wow, he's got a Yeti. That's pretty good. Now, the fourth concept is Marx's critique of liberalism. Now, this doesn't really pertain to his economics or his critique of the capitalist economy per se, but I think it's a very important aspect of Marx. And I think his writing on the Jewish question, which is a response to his friend Bruno Bauer, I think is really worthwhile. I think it's one of the best things I've ever read in the realm of political philosophy. And so what Marx is doing is Bruno Bauer writes an article about Jewish emancipation. Okay. So Jews in Europe are looking for greater liberties and looking for emancipation and greater freedoms and so on. So Bruno Bauer is not for this. Now, I want to be careful. I want to be clear. Bruno Bauer is not anti-Jewish emancipation. Bruno Bauer is not anti-Jewish liberation. Bruno Bauer's critique is that Jews and Christians alike will not be able to emancipate themselves fully until they emancipate themselves from their religions. That's part of the thing holding them back, is the fact that they're adhering to these religions. So Marx responds to Bruno Bauer in an essay called On the Jewish Question. And Marx's point is citizens can be fully emancipated and enjoy perfect freedoms and still adhere to the religion of their choice or whatever. That they don't have to get rid of their Jewishness or their Christianness. The problem for Marx is classical liberalism, the core principles of classical liberalism. So for Marx, he's looking at the core principles of classical liberalism, like protection of person and property and equality and these kinds of concepts. And he says that you can be liberated and free on paper and still be at the mercy of the state. That only gets you so far. The problem the problem Marx has with this notion is that liberalism does not fully free the individual, because the core principles of classical liberalism have to do with protecting me from you and you from me. If we look at the core principles like protection of person and property and equality and so on, there's an inherent adversarial relationship between the two, between me and you. And the goal of liberalism is to protect my liberties from you and from the state. Because you can encroach on my liberties, the state can encroach on my liberties, and liberalism is about freeing the individual. But Marx says, no, this doesn't free us. It just protects certain civil liberties and so on and so forth. For Marx, the idea is to fully emancipate the individual as a human being. And this is something that, for Marx, liberalism neglects. Liberalism doesn't address the needs of the individual as a human being. Liberalism addresses the needs of the human being, or addresses the needs of the person as a citizen of the state. And that's the problem. That's his critique. That's, in a nutshell, his critique of liberalism. It's about emancipating the individual as a human, not as a citizen. And that's his response to Bruno Bauer. That's Marx's critique of liberalism. So, let's talk about some common assertions. Love these. So let's just take these one by one, and I'll just say a couple things about this nonsense that people love to say, and they say it all the time, and I hear this stuff constantly, not constantly, but pretty frequently. So we'll just go one at a time. Marxism, that is socialism, won't work. Okay. First off, the sentence Marxism won't work doesn't make any sense. It's a nonsensical sentence. It doesn't mean anything. Because Marxism is not a blueprint for a perfect world. Marxism is a critique of 19th century factory capitalism, and that's what he's talking about. So Marxism won't work doesn't even make any sense. That sentence is gibberish. And then the sentence socialism won't work. People say that like the sky's blue, like it's a self-evident truth. Socialism won't work. Why the hell not? Why can't the workers own the factories? Why can't the government provide services to make the lives of its citizenry easier? Why is all that impossible? But the American population has internalized this, and they just say it like, yeah, it won't work. Can't have that. Like universal health care. Can't have that. That's socialism. You know, we're gonna have universal health care at one point, and when we look in the rearview mirror, it's gonna be like letting women vote, or freeing the slaves. Before they freed the slaves, you can't free the slaves. It would just be chaos. You can't let women vote. That's crazy. Because they'd be the end of the United States as we know it. And then they freed the slaves, and they let women vote, and then I can't even imagine going back to the old ways. And then when we have universal health care, same damn thing. They're going to be like, how did we ever go? How did we go so long without this? It's on for a for-profit system, lorded over by Blue Cross Blue Shield. Are you kidding me? It's just the mind reels. So that's the first one. Second one, people aren't insects. I've had people say this to me. Like, well, under socialism, we would, you'd just be like an ant or a bee in a hive. You'd just be a worker drone. Didn't I just get done talking about species being and the alienated relationship to species being, and how under the capitalist economy, within a capitalist economy, that is kind of what you've become? So this thing that they're afraid of, humans being insects, humans are treated like insects now. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only person who understands this. When you work for what is essentially a totalitarian system, a corporation, you're basically treated like an insect. Like a worker drone. Like the proverbial cog in the machine. That's kind of how you're treated. Under socialism, under what Marx is sort of hinting at, the opposite would be the case. and humans would have more free time and more latitude to engage in things they wanted to engage in and live a more creative life, not working in a totalitarian system in a giant corporation. That reduces people to insecthood or whatever. Third one, under socialism, people won't want to work. Again, I don't even know what to really do with that one. Why would people not want to work? Marx talks about up one side and down the other, how people live to work. And people want to work. And people naturally sort of just engage in work. And a lot of people who are unemployed don't like it and want to get back to work. And the infrastructure in this country is falling down around our ears, and there's plenty of people who would be delighted to go build a new bridge or whatever, lay a new railroad track or fix this or fix that. They'd be delighted. So under socialism, I don't know why people, I think it's just a reflection of how they view humanity. Humans are just lazy, terrible creatures, except for them, mind you. The person who sang this never includes themselves. They are pinnacles of virtue. They are paragons, and it's only the other people who are lazy and will just mooch off the system. And there are people who do mooch off the system. Absolutely. They're rich. They wear business suits by Tom Ford and collect millions of free dollars every year, and they mooch off the system. A lot of people who mooch off the system can be found in very expensive business suits walking around Wall Street. So yeah, there are people who mooch off the system, and there are lazy people, and they can be found on Wall Street. Or in the board of directors at like the defense contractors. There's your lazy people mooching off the system. Absolutely. That part I absolutely agree. Under socialism, yeah, it will reward lazy people. Yeah, there they are. Do they? Oh yeah. Do you want everyone to be the same? This is like the insect thing. Why would socialism make everyone the same? It doesn't even. I don't even. Some of these are pretty hard to respond to because they're just bizarre. They're not wrong like 2 + 2 = 7. They're not wrong like that. They're wrong like 2 + 2 = yogurt. Like, where do you even start to fix that? It's just too strange, People want to be, do you want everyone to be the same? No, I don't. That's why I'm supportive of the notion of socialism. Because when you work for a giant corporation, you basically are treated as the same. And you basically are a worker drone. And this fear of everyone being the same is sort of what we have now. The mass media, the corporate influence over the culture, the thoughts that we're not supposed to think, the conformity. There's a very high level of conformity in this country, and a lot of those fears exist now. Curiously, like people aren't insects, and you want people to be the same, and people won't want to work. Yeah. If you're afraid of these things, then I would just take a look at the world, the country that you live in right now. What's the next one? Look at Russia. Is that what you want? No. No, it's not what I want. And that question doesn't make any sense either. Yeti. You might as well have asked me, Bangladesh. Is that what you want? Or Eritrea. Is that what you want? No. And what does Russia have to do with anything? This stems from the very tight linkage between the Soviet Union and Karl Marx. That's why they asked this ridiculous question. Look at Russia. Is that what you want? But Russia doesn't have anything to do with communism, and doesn't have anything to do with Marx. So why the hell you ask me about Russia? You just showed your hand. You just showed your hand, and you just told me that you have no idea what you're talking about. What's the next one? The Soviet Union collapsed. Oh no, that's like I hadn't heard. Hey, what? You know, they tell me that the Soviet Union collapsed. And here's my favorite bit. Here's my favorite bit, because we, and that by we, Ronald Reagan, the former president, outspent him. Oh, be still my beating heart. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that such a tempting image? Our hero, cowboy president, pulls out a checkbook and induces the Soviet Union to spend itself to death. That's a very tempting image, and it's one that, I mean, that is like seated in the American imagination. Our cowboy president with his checkbook, single-handedly destroying communism. I'll give you that. It is a tempting, romantic, seductive image, no doubt about it. Except it doesn't have anything to do with reality. The Soviet Union collapsed because of the Soviet Union, and its problems were internal to the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev was elected as General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1985. He was General Secretary until 1991. He was President of Russia for about 5 minutes. He implemented a number of reforms that had a pretty profound effect on the Soviet Union and specifically the Communist Party. Glasnost, which is a policy of transparency. There was more open journalism and so on and so forth. There's a more tolerant atmosphere for airing one's grievances and so on. Perestroika was another one. That means restructuring. And then you had demokratizatsiya. Notice my Russian pronunciation, very sophisticated. That means democratization. So you had elections. You're holding local elections and so on. So you've restructured. So they restructured the country in a pretty short order. But the Soviet Union was coming on. All this was on the heels of 20 years of what was called the era of stagnation. So you had a pretty severe economic downturn in the Soviet Union after a very bad housing crisis. But you had a very poor economy. You had these reform policies brought to you by Gorbachev, and then you had the increase in market mechanisms. You had increased allocation to the market economy. You had an increase in the autonomy of the industry. Industry could now make its own decisions more so than just kowtowing to the Communist Party. The Communist Party had become very corrupt. It had become nepotistic. It was, yeah, and so all these factors, and then you had increased foreign policy issues with the Soviet satellite countries. So you had an increase. Yeah, you had an increasingly destabilized relationship between the Soviet Union, between Russia and its Soviet satellite countries, and Gorbachev had also reduced. I mean, this goes back to the Reagan outspentum nonsense. You did see a drop in military spending to a degree. Yes, the Soviet Union was pouring a breathtaking amount of money into Afghanistan. When will it sink in that invading Afghanistan is not a great idea? The Soviets spent a decade there, spent untold billions of dollars, and achieved nothing. And then the Americans spent 20 years there, spent $2 trillion, and achieved just as much. Just as the Americans are packing their bags, the Taliban retook the country in about an afternoon, and that was that. Do you think 20 years and $2 trillion, you'd have something to show for it? But the Soviets, yeah, were pouring a lot of money into Afghanistan. All the while trying to, they discontinued the Brezhnev doctrine, which was basically a belligerent policy during the Brezhnev years. The Russians would deploy the military in the case of instability in its periphery, but that got discontinued. Gorbachev also, in many cases, reduced the size of the military, cut back on military spending. So there wasn't this crazy throttles down military spending. There was a lot of military spending, but there were some. It was cut back quite a bit, and but it was too little, too late. And these reforms that Gorbachev implemented, there were knock-on effects, and they drastically weakened the Communist Party. So all these factors, the foreign policy issues, the bad economy, the reform policies, these all weakened the Communist Party pretty significantly, and that's what collapsed the Soviet Union, not Ronald Reagan and his checkbook and his cowboy hat. I'd just like to add a side note. I thought Republican conservative folk were all about fiscal conservatism. Isn't Reagan like their patron saint, Mr. Fiscal Conservatism? So how does facing off with a major world power and playing chicken with a checkbook consistent with fiscal conservatism? It is not. So this Reagan outspentum thing is a bunch of nonsense. It's a bunch of nonsense anyway, because it didn't happen. But even if it did happen, it's still nonsense, because it's completely contradictory to what conservative Republicans and people who ooh and ah about Ronald Reagan, what they promote and cheer on and claim to be their core fiscal ideology. It's nonsense. Okay, what's that? Oh, socialism rewards the lazy. Well, we kind of already touched on that. If you want laziness, just look to the people living on free money in the United States. They tend to be filthy rich, have multiple homes, have private jets, are on the board of directors of the defense contractors. Wear Tom Ford suits, walk around Wall Street. There's your lazy people, and they enjoy socialism, and right now, and and they're being rewarded. The kind of socialism that rewards the working class, oh, terrible. It's the worst thing in the world. Can't have that. But you can reward the rich. You can reward the rich. and 77 million Americans voted for rewarding the rich last November. Well done. And then capitalism is the best system. I love that one. That might be one of my favorite. Let me take another sip. Capitalism is the best system. I love that. So let's imagine you're living in the, let's see, the 14th century France. Okay? You're living in 14th century France. Okay, you're living in the 1300s in the French countryside, and let's say you're, doesn't matter, a farmer. Okay. So there you're out there tending your crops, and you're in the French countryside in the year 1350. I'm just making something up. And then your neighbor comes out to see what you're up to. And your neighbor's a blacksmith. And your neighbor says to you, you guys are leaning like on a fence post, having a neighborly chit chat. And your blacksmith neighbor says to you, feudalism is the best system. Now, I don't know how you would respond if this were 1350. But you would think that sounds a little odd, if not straight up funny. No. Feudalism is the best system. You would think, well, buddy, you would just look at him perplexed. But that's how we should look at people who say capitalism is the best system. Socioeconomic systems are not there to love. They're there to be improved upon. They're not religions, and yet they're treated as religions. And capitalism is a kind of religion in the United States. And people gush and swoon and talk about how wonderful capitalism is. And just like those people who talk about how they hate modern art, people who talk about how wonderful capitalism is, my observation, they don't seem to know much about what capitalism is. But that's not important. The important part is to love it. Knowing what it is, that's irrelevant. That's like head in the cloud. That's nerdy stuff. It's like stuff in books. You're just supposed to love capitalism. You're supposed to look at the American flag and see capitalism, and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and you just capitalism pouring out of you. And you say you sing the national anthem at the baseball game, and it's a song to capitalism. It's part of the national religion. This is very weird. It's very weird, and it's a remarkable success. Because if I were in charge of the country, and I were filthy rich, and I was in control, I would want people to love it too. So you can see, it's a remarkable achievement on the part of the doctrinal system. You want the people in your country loving the socioeconomic system. The Soviets couldn't achieve that kind of consistency, and yet we've achieved it here in the land of the free. Yeah. The Soviets were always fascinated by American obedience, how docile we were, how voluntary we were about our love of country, our love of capitalism, our love of this, our love of that. The Soviets were frequently fascinated by that, and correctly, because it's done on a volunteer basis. The Soviets had to use a bludgeon, had to had to break up the German shepherds and stuff. Here, people just do it on their own. It's remarkable. It's a remarkable achievement. Like I said earlier, Marx, he wrote an unbelievable amount of material. Marx. The pile of books that guy wrote, the number of pages he churned out is staggering. You could spend the rest of your life reading Marx and studying Marx. I think 3 books would do it. If you want to kind of dive into this stuff, I think 3 books would do it. And that is, 1, I mentioned these briefly a little while ago, the Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844. I smell books. I won't give you a full tutorial. I've been doing it since I was 7, so it's kind of hard not to do. I've been doing it since I was a kid, smelling books. I love the smell of books. New books, not old books. You can just call it the 1844 manuscripts. Okay? Pink cover. Not very long, manageable. And it contains that chapter on estranged labor. Yeah, I would read the 1844 manuscript. That's early Marx. And then 4 years later, he wrote the Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto, as you can see, is quite short. It's barely a book. It's 70 pages long. And you don't even need to read it. You can just go on YouTube and have someone read it to you. There's audio versions of it on YouTube. Plural audio versions. I can't remember how long they were. I just did that somewhat recently. I listened to someone read the Communist Manifesto. It's not very long though, because the text isn't very long. It's only 70 pages. And, yeah. I wish he hadn't titled it Communist Manifesto, because people just read the title and they think, oh, it's a communist blueprint. Marx is planning for a communist world, or it's his plans for a communist world. It's not. That's not what the book's about. Most of the book is about the dynamic between, like I mentioned earlier, the proletariat, that is the working class, and the bourgeoisie, which is the capitalist class. It's the dynamic between those two dominant classes, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And that's most of what the book's about. The book's about capitalism. I really wish he hadn't titled it the Communist Manifesto. It just caused confusion, really. It would have been much better if he had titled it, the Capitalism Sucks Manifesto. That would have been a much better title, because then people would be like, oh, okay, now I get it. Because, people don't want to read the whole book, they just read the title and then they think they're an expert on Marx's thought. So, yeah, Communist Manifesto, very short, and just go online and you can go to YouTube. And then, okay, Capital Volume 1. This thing is a monster. It is 950 pages long. Is it easy reading? No. Especially the first, I can't remember. The first, I think it's the first 70 pages or so. First 70 pages are, oh my God, they're hard. It's very challenging. And the rest of the book, he does come up, for air a little bit. And it does lighten up. But it's still, you get your work cut out for you with that book. Capital Volume 1. What is known as Das Kapital. People love to say the German, Das Kapital. You can just call it Capital Volume 1, it's fine. It's a monster. It takes a bloody long time to read. I don't think I'm a very fast reader. I don't think I am. That was my whole summer. I read it over a summer. And when I say whole summer, I mean I didn't do anything else. I roll out of bed, start reading, forget to eat, forget to bathe, close the book when it's dark out. Rinse, repeat. 7 days a week. That's all I did. And that was my whole summer. It's a monster. But I don't want to discourage you from reading it. It's really good, and the footnotes are so good. He just skewers so many people in the footnotes. It's really a lot of fun to read that stuff. So yeah, you can read Capital One, Capital Volume 1, and yeah, it's a very rewarding read, but it's quite challenging. Before you dive into this stuff, but before you dive into any of that stuff, I would get your feet wet first. I'd walk into the shallow end of the pool and just kind of, read. There's a whole mess of introductions and primers on Marx. There's a whole mess of them. I own a bunch of them. And the best one I have found to date is this one, by Jonathan Wolfe, called Why Read Marx Today. It's very short, it's very easy to read, and I've read that book probably 5 or 6 times, and it's superb. And he explains the concepts and explains this and that, and kind of holds your hand. And yeah, I would read something like this before you dive into the 1844 manuscripts, the Communist Manifesto, or definitely before Capital. I would read something like that. And really, if you're gonna dive into Capital, yeah, I should have begun this earlier. There's a companion to Marx's Capital by David Harvey. I would read this. I would read this book. It's how many pages is it? Well, 350. Not quite 350. I would read this David Harvey book before you read Capital, because there's a lot to consider, and the structure of Capital is pretty breathtaking. So Harvey does a nice job of boiling that stuff down and preparing you for your journey to read Capital Volume 1. Also, I would watch the film. I just like it. It's a good film. The Young Karl Marx.
Without child labor, we'd price ourselves out of the market.
And where would a society without exploitation leave people like you? You would have to work too. Wouldn't that be horrible?
I would check that out. It's really good. It's a lot of fun. They did their homework. It's a really good film. It's directed by Raule Peck, and it came out in, oh dear, what year did it come out? I gotta check. Let me check. Enjoy this soothing music. (2017). 2017, the Young Karl Marx came out, and I would check it out. I like the guy who plays Friedrich Engels, who was Marx's longtime friend, collaborator, and financial supporter. Friedrich Engels. The guy who plays him is really good. Yeah, check it out. It's a really good film. It's really well done. So, I think that's it. I hope this episode leaves you with a greater understanding of Karl Marx, with at least leaves you with the basics. Send me some emails if you have any questions, or you're like, oh, I'm looking for this kind of book, or oh, just send me an email and let me know what's on your mind. And then yeah. Did I talk about my new equipment? Can't remember. Yeah. We're using new equipment. I'm so excited. I think I mentioned that. And this seems like this episode was really long. I've been going over an hour. Okay. So, I don't know what the next episode's going to be. We had the religion one. But there's other topics that have been popping into my head, so we'll see. So, stay tuned for the next episode of The Inquiry.